Have you ever stopped to wonder why, even after following all the rules imposed on you since birth, the feeling that something is terribly wrong never disappears? Why, despite all the technology and promises of progress, do you feel more exhausted, more watched, and less free every day? This anguish that tightens your chest is not paranoia, nor is it a flaw in your perception. It is your instinct screaming that the reality presented on your cell phone screen is a fabrication. Welcome to the shattering of the illusion. What we are experiencing now, at this very historical moment, is not just another passing political or economic crisis. Don't be fooled by superficial headlines that try to normalize the chaos. We are witnessing the end of collective sleepwalking, the programmed collapse of a millennia-old lie that has kept humanity on its knees, serving masters it has never seen, paying debts it never incurred, and fighting wars that are not its own. For centuries, we've been told stories about monsters and demons to keep us afraid of the dark, but the truth is far more visceral and disturbing. The great beast, mentioned in prophecies and ancient texts, isn't necessarily a mythological creature that will emerge from the seas with 7 heads. It's far more sophisticated, cold, and efficient. The beast is the system. It's the omnipresent control structure that governs your finances, dictates what you should think through the hegemonic media, and shapes your perception of reality from kindergarten onwards. It's the invisible hand that transforms productive citizens into perpetual taxpayers, converting your vital energy into profit for an elite that despises your existence. Look around you. The inflation that devours your plate of food, the censorship that silences dissenting voices, the ideological division that makes brother fight with brother while the architects of power toast in their ivory towers. All of these are tentacles of the same voracious entity. Do you feel the world as we knew it is crumbling? Great. Hold on to that feeling, for it is the first step toward freedom. Discomfort is the sign that the anesthesia of cheap entertainment has worn off. The normalcy that many want to return to was nothing more than a comfortable prison, a gilded cage, where obedience was exchanged for a false sense of security. But the bars are rusting. The system has metastasized, and in its endless greed for total control has ended up exposing its own flaws. What they call the Great Reset or New Order, we call a desperate attempt to keep the cattle in the corral when the fences have already been torn down. The stark truth is that the beast needs your unconscious cooperation to survive. It feeds on your apathy and your silent consent. Therefore, forget everything you've been taught about how society works. The rose-colored glasses need to be shattered now. We're not here to fix the old world. We're here to witness its funeral and understand what rises from the ashes. The cognitive dissonance you feel, that pain of seeing the lie rubbed in your face, is the birth of a new consciousness. But in order for us to navigate this turbulent ocean without sinking, we need to dissect exactly how this machinery captured us. We need to look at the bloody gears of this mechanism and understand, unfiltered, how we allowed our sovereignty to be stolen. After all, to dismantle the trap, you first need to understand the complexity of its mechanism. To dismantle the trap, we first need the gut-wrenching courage to look at its grease and blood-covered gears and admit that this architecture of oppression was not an accident, but a meticulously designed project to convert sovereign human beings into disposable batteries. The beast's anatomy is complex, but its ultimate goal is brutally simple: the continuous extraction of your vital energy through mechanisms you have been trained to defend and call normal life. We're not talking about abstract conspiracy theories. We're talking about the engineering of your daily life, that heavy feeling you carry on your shoulders from the moment you wake up to a shrill alarm clock until you collapse from exhaustion in front of a bright screen. The first pillar of this modern slavery is the most obvious and, at the same time, the most invisible: the debt-based financial system. Understand once and for all that the money you use is not a store of value, it's an instrument of behavioral control. From the moment the gold standard was abandoned and money began to be printed out of thin air, based solely on faith and government debt, you entered a race where the finish line constantly moves forward. Inflation is not a natural phenomenon like rain or wind. It's a hidden tax, a deliberate tool to ensure that your work today is worth less tomorrow, forcing you to run faster and faster on the hamster wheel just to stay in the same place. The beast created a scenario where existence is expensive. Think about it. You pay to live on the planet where you were born, you pay to drink the water that springs from the earth, you pay to exist. And since most people can't keep up with the frenetic pace of monetary devaluation, the solution presented by the system is credit. Debt is the modern version of chains. When you finance a house over 30 years or a car in 60 installments, you're not buying goods, you're selling your future. You're signing a contract where you hand over your lifespan, which is the only truly non-renewable resource you possess, in exchange for objects that often don't even last the duration of the financing. This leads us directly to the second gear of this soul-crushing machine: planned obsolescence. It's no coincidence that your grandmother's refrigerator lasted 40 years and your latest smartphone starts malfunctioning after 18 months of use. The beast needs continuous consumption to maintain the illusion of economic growth. If things lasted, you wouldn't need to work so hard to replace them. If you didn't need to work so hard, you'd have free time. And here's the secret they fear. Free time allows for thought. Free time allows for philosophy, art, spiritual connection, and inevitably, rebellion. To prevent you from having time to question your own servitude, the system creates fragile products, both physically and psychologically. There's technical obsolescence, where a chip is designed to fail, but there's also perceived obsolescence, which is even more perverse. It's the social engineering that makes you feel ashamed of owning a 3-year-old car or wearing clothes that aren't in this season. They manipulate your dopamine, creating a vicious cycle of desire and frustration. You work all month in a job you often hate, surrounded by bureaucracy and corporate politics, to buy something that will give you a 5-minute burst of happiness, immediately followed by the emptiness that drives you to the next purchase. You become an addict, and the system is the drug dealer supplying the materialistic drug to fill a spiritual void it has dug itself. But how do they ensure that, even while suffering, we don't unite to overthrow this structure? The answer lies in ideological division, the oldest and most effective tactic in the control manual. Divide and conquer. The beast operates by creating silos of thought. Look at social media, politics, public debate. Everything has been transformed into a binary coliseum. Left versus right, men versus women, young versus old, races versus races. The system bombards your mind 24 hours a day with narratives designed to make you hate your neighbor, your co-worker, even your family, based on superficial labels. While we fight in the arena, distracted by manufactured culture wars fueled by algorithms that prioritize conflict and outrage, the elite that operates the beast continues to consolidate power, transfer wealth, and restrict freedoms behind the scenes. They give us false enemies so that we never identify the real enemy. You are conditioned to defend your political tribe tooth and nail, without realizing that both sides of the political spectrum are, more often than not, two wings of the same bird of prey. This polarization blinds reason. It prevents the working class, the productive class, from realizing that they have more in common with each other than with the billionaires who finance the campaigns of the politicians they idolize. This architecture of oppression has also hijacked the educational system. The school, in the Prussian model we still use, was never designed to create critical thinkers, philosophers, or revolutionaries. It was designed to create obedient factory workers and disciplined soldiers for the trenches. From an early age, you are trained to ask permission to speak, to ask permission to go to the bathroom, to memorize and repeat information without questioning the teacher's authority, to live governed by the sound of the bell. This Pavlovian conditioning prepares us for corporate adult life. The child who seeks approval through grades becomes the adult who seeks validation through positions and salaries, terrified of displeasing the boss. Creativity, intuition, and connection with the divine are systematically pruned, ridiculed, and replaced by the cold logic of utilitarianism. The system wants you to be intelligent enough to operate the machines and fill out the paperwork, but not intelligent enough to realize how fraudulent the situation you are in is. And the ultimate fuel for this machinery is fear. The beast's anatomy is coated in terror, fear of scarcity, fear of disease, fear of the other, fear of social exclusion. A frightened population is an infantilized population, begging for protection and accepting any authoritarian measure in exchange for the promise of security. They keep your sympathetic nervous system on constant high alert, flooding your body with cortisol, which not only destroys your physical health, creating a multi-billion-dollar pharmaceutical industry to treat the symptoms of the lifestyle they imposed, but also blocks access to your higher consciousness. It is impossible to vibrate at a high frequency. It is impossible to access intuition and spiritual wisdom when you are stuck in survival mode, worried about whether you will be able to pay the rent or whether you will be cancelled for expressing an opinion. They have transformed us into reactive beings instead of creative ones. The energy we should use to build a paradise on earth is drained to keep this bureaucratic purgatory standing. Now, look at your life with brutal honesty. How many of your daily choices are genuinely your own, and how many are automatic responses to these conditioning factors? How many times have you bought something you didn't need to impress people you don't like? How many hours of your life did you sell this week to pay interest on something you don't even use anymore? The great beast isn't just in Washington, London, or Davos. It has built an outpost inside your mind. The most efficient form of slavery is one where the slave believes they are free because they can choose between brand A and brand B of soda, or between the blue news channel and the red news channel, without realizing that all options belong to the same owner. Recognizing this engineering, seeing the bars of this prison without walls, hurts. It generates anger. It generates a profound sense of betrayal. But this indignation is necessary. It is the fuel that will burn away the veil of ignorance, because once you see the anatomy of the beast, you can't unsee it. You begin to perceive the flaws in the armor. You begin to notice that, despite all this apparent power, the system is incredibly fragile, because it depends entirely on our belief in it to exist. If we stop believing in the value of their money, it becomes worthless. If we stop watching their media, they speak into the void. If we stop hating each other, they lose their soldiers. We are walking a tightrope, and a deep understanding of how we have been manipulated should not depress us, but arm us intellectually and spiritually. They stole our history, our health, and our wealth, but they couldn't steal our essence, and that's precisely where the danger lies for them. Because this entire structure of control, this complex engineering of debt and fear, was built on a foundation of historical lies. To keep you submissive in the present, they needed to falsify the past. And that's exactly what we need to talk about now, about what was hidden in forbidden libraries and the basements of the Vatican, about the true origin of humanity that was erased from textbooks. Before we move on to this all-changing revelation, I want you to leave a comment here. Which of these gears of control do you feel most affects your life today? Is it debt, political division, or the feeling that time is being stolen from you? Write, "I see the chains," if you're ready for what comes next, because now we're going to lift the veil covering human history and expose the root of all this manipulation. You wrote, "I see the chains," and that is the only attitude that will allow us to tear the veil of ISIS, that opaque fabric of misinformation that covers our true heritage and potential. The beast was not content to enslave your present and kidnap your future. It needed to rewrite your past. Think of human history not as a series of bona fide documented facts, but as a libretto of servitude, edited and censored by the victors. The great trigger of curiosity here is, what have they hidden from us? It's not just trivial details, it's the very understanding of who we are, where we came from, and what we are truly capable of. The official narrative, the one taught in schools and replicated by controlled museums, is a fairy tale where humanity is portrayed as a young, stupid species, always on the verge of self-destruction, capable of progressing only under the tutelage of centralized governments and elite institutions. This is a fundamental lie for maintaining the system of control. If you believe that your species only emerged from caves a few tens of thousands of years ago and only recently discovered the wheel and writing, you naturally accept the authority of whoever presents themselves as your evolved tutor. The manipulation of human history is not a mere academic error. It is the ideological foundation of the beast. Imagine that ancient civilizations existed, hidden beneath layers of sediment and academic denial, achieving levels of suppressed knowledge and technological sophistication that would make our current world seem primitive. We are talking about eras where free energy was a fact, where vibrational healing was the norm, where consciousness was not just a byproduct of the brain, but the very essence of reality. The beast and its predecessors worked tirelessly to erase these traces, to create a false tipping point in our history, ensuring that the cycle of dependence and control is restarted whenever humanity approaches sovereign freedom. Think of great cataclysms, events that official history classifies as natural disasters, but which in reality may have been opportunities used by the controlling elites to eliminate rival technology and rewrite the records, burying proof that humanity can thrive without their parasitic system. What was stolen from us? Hidden technologies. It's not about flying cars, it's about understanding the fundamental laws of energy, gravity, and resonance. Think of geniuses like Nikola Tesla, whose ideas about zero-point energy and wireless transmission were systematically marginalized, ridiculed, and ultimately confiscated. Why? Because free energy, accessible to all, instantly destroys the beast's monopoly on oil, gas, and most importantly, on their transportation and production. If you can generate clean, unlimited energy in your backyard, centralized control over the global economy and geopolitics simply evaporates. The liberating truth begins when we realize that our modern science, while impressive in some aspects, is intentionally limited in others. It is a materialistic science that denies the spirit, consciousness, and unlimited potential of the quantum field, keeping us trapped in the belief that everything is scarce and difficult. The very origin of life and consciousness on Earth has been transformed into dogma. We have been taught to believe that we are genetically defective, or that we are the result of a random and purposeless accident. This nihilistic and narrow view of our existence is fundamental to the engineering of submission. If you see yourself as an insignificant being in a hostile universe, you accept your place at the base of the pyramid with less resistance. However, Gnostic knowledge and esoteric traditions, which have resisted institutional censorship, suggest that our lineage is much older, more complex, and, most importantly, that our creative capacity is divine and limitless. When you begin to delve into the history of civilizations like Göbekli Tepe, the anomalies of the Sphinx, or the structures of Pumapunku, you realize that the official chronology is a house of cards ready to collapse. This evidence whispers the truth. There was a time when we were masters of our own destiny. The beast needed to create collective amnesia to survive. It uses media and education to maintain a perpetual cycle of distraction and forgetfulness. Each generation is forced to rediscover principles that were once common knowledge in past eras, losing decades of progress. What the victors did was edit history to present themselves as the benevolent saviors of humanity, when in reality they are the heirs of ancient lineages of control. They want you to fear your own freedom, associating it with chaos and anarchy so that you beg for more control. The narrative that if it weren't for the government, banks, authority, we would live in barbarism is the greatest foundational myth of slavery. Understanding the veil of Isis is an act of personal sovereignty. It means ceasing to delegate your capacity for research and discernment to institutions with a proven track record of lying. This requires you to become an archaeologist of your own mind, unearthing the truths that have been buried under the weight of propaganda. When you realize that the scarcity imposed by the system is artificial, and that the technology for abundance already exists, your perception of your work and your value changes drastically. You understand that the true invisible war is not for territory or resources, but for your mind and your historical memory. They want you to continue believing that the only possible revolution is political or social, because they know that the only revolution that truly destroys them is the revolution of consciousness, the one that restores your memory of being a powerful and eternal being. The revelation that the great beast is based on historical fraud is the Achilles heel of the system. It is a parasite that lives off the past it itself fabricated. But the past is coming back to light, driven by the decentralization of information. Never before in modern history has it been so easy to compare data, connect the dots, and challenge academic dogmas with independent archaeological and scientific evidence. This unveiling is what is causing panic in the spheres of power. They can censor videos and delete pages, but they cannot erase the truth that awakens within each of us. What follows this understanding is the point of no return. After understanding that your story is a convenient lie and that your potential is infinitely greater than the system allows, you need to know what the beast's next move is. If the past was the basis of the lie, what are they planning now to maintain the illusion while the veil tears? They are doubling down, using fear like never before. And it is about this final tactic, this last card of the system, that we need to talk about now. Did you feel the vibration of truth? That tingling sensation when confronting the falsified history is what proves that our consciousness is active and that the beast is in trouble. Because if its foundation is lies and historical manipulation, the moment the truth begins to surface is inevitably the moment the perfection of control begins to crack. We are living within a glitch in the matrix, a period where glitches, the flaws in the system, are so evident that it takes a Herculean effort to continue ignoring them. The chaos we see in the streets, on the stock exchanges, and in the palaces of power is not a show of force, but the death throes of a parasitic entity that is losing control of the narrative. Observe the visible signs of collapse. The first and most glaring is the erosion of the credibility of mass media. The propaganda machine, which for decades operated as the unquestionable voice of the beast, is failing miserably. Media narratives simply no longer stick. They contradict themselves within weeks, are easily refuted by information from independent sources, and what is most fatal for the beast, generate more ridicule than fear. They spend billions to control the flow of information, but the speed of truth in decentralized networks is exponentially greater than the speed of centralized lies. People are not just disagreeing, they are laughing at the absurdity, which is a lethal poison for authority that sustains itself only on pomp and reverential fear. The average citizen, armed with a smartphone and a newly awakened critical sense, has become the worst nightmare of corporate journalism. This flaw in the narrative is directly proportional to the increase in widespread distrust in global institutions. Think of supranational organizations, central banks, health agencies, and elite economic forums. They were once seen as infallible oracles. Today, they are targets of massive scrutiny. The public is connecting the dots. Why are the same power groups that benefit from a crisis the same ones that predict it and propose the solutions? Fear doesn't work when the intention behind it is so transparent. This crisis of institutional faith is what is truly dismantling the beast from within. The system is a castle built with bricks of trust. When trust disappears, the entire structure becomes vulnerable to a simple breath. The very desperate attempt to appear relevant or virtuous only exposes the hypocrisy and total disconnection of these elites from the reality of productive humanity. And what happens when the truth starts to break through the bubble? The desperation of the elites to censor decentralized information. This is definitive proof that the beast is mortally wounded. If the official narrative were solid and true, it wouldn't need to fact-checkers purchased from algorithms that suppress independent voices, or from coordinated campaigns of shadow-banning censorship is the system's confession of guilt. It reveals that the only thing that truly threatens centralized power is the free exchange of ideas and sovereign thought. They try to isolate us in echo chambers and penalize us for simply questioning, using pejorative labels like conspiracy theorist to try to neutralize the messenger instead of refuting the message. But this tactic is losing its effectiveness. For every silenced account, 10 new channels of alternative information emerge. The beast is using brute force against the fluidity of information, and it's a battle it cannot win. The beast, when wounded, does not retreat. It becomes louder and more authoritarian. We are seeing an exponential increase in attempts at digital surveillance, the imposition of centralized digital identities, and financial regulations that seek to stifle any kind of economic autonomy. This is not the advancement of a daring plan. It is the instinctive reaction of a cornered predator trying to bite the air before falling. They are making colossal miscalculations, such as imposing measures that harm their own long-term economic interests just to maintain immediate ideological control. The haste with which they try to push certain global agendas reveals their panic. They know that the window of opportunity to consolidate total control is closing rapidly. This is the point you need to internalize. The current chaos is not strength. It is systemic disorder generated by the loss of control. The system is self-destructing. The beast's corrective mechanisms, its banks, its governments, its media, can no longer effectively coordinate the lies. They are in internal discord, competing for crumbs of power on a sinking ship. It's like watching an orchestra where each musician decides to play their own score. The result is cacophony, which to us sounds like freedom of dissonance. Our strength lies in recognizing this fragility. The beast is large, it is complex, but it is made of paper. It depends on our acceptance of its authority. Consider the revelations that have come to light in recent years about government surveillance, data manipulation, conflicts of interest in the pharmaceutical industry, and the unimaginable fortunes that were created and transferred during periods of induced panic. These are not theories. They are verified facts that are now part of the public historical record. What was once hidden in the most secret files is now being chewed up and shared on millions of devices around the planet. This forced transparency is the slow poison that is killing the beast. It thrives in darkness and secrecy. The light of truth is its kryptonite. But be warned, this period of systemic collapse is also the most dangerous. Like a wounded animal, the beast will use its final and most powerful tactic to try to regenerate. It will double down on fear. It has seen that economic control is slipping away with the rise of decentralization. It has seen that historical manipulation is being exposed, and it has seen that the media is losing the war for credibility. It has only one resource left that still holds some power over the unawakened mind: psychological terror. It is therefore crucial that we understand the next phase of the struggle. They will bombard us with manufactured crises to force us to beg for the same hand that imprisoned us. They will try to make us believe that we are defenseless without the state, that we cannot survive without the central banking system, and that the only way out is to accept a dystopian level of control in exchange for false security. Fear is the beast's primary fuel. We need to dissect this tactic now. How do they create panic? What are the psychological mechanisms that lead us to willingly surrender our freedom? And crucially, how can we shield ourselves against this weapon of mass destruction of consciousness? If you're following along and feel that the beast's confession of guilt through censorship is the biggest sign that we're winning this information war, leave a comment.emoji thunder in the comments. Next, we'll delve into the psychology of fear and understand the system's last resort so we can disarm it. The beast is bleeding. Its fabricated history is being unraveled, its media is losing credibility, and the very architecture of its financial control is showing deep cracks. But a wounded predator is always the most dangerous. If brute force and subtle lies no longer work, only the most potent weapon of mass destruction remains: fear as fuel. This is the system's last card, and its effectiveness lies in our ignorance of the psychology of terror. We need to understand this now, because fear is the only frequency that still connects the beast to its soul. A terrified mind does not reason, it only obeys. Think about your physiology. When fear is triggered, your body goes into fight or flight mode. Cortisol and adrenaline flood your system, and your prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for logical thinking, analysis, and creativity, is hijacked. You become a reactive being, incapable of deep discernment. The system knows this and relentlessly exploits this primitive mechanism. The apocalyptic headlines that dominate the news cycle, whether about the next health threat, the irreversible climate crisis, the imminent economic collapse, or the looming nuclear war, are all designed with a single purpose: to keep you vibrating at the frequency of fear. The beast needs you to feel small, powerless, and desperate so that you beg for a savior. The script is always the same: problem, reaction, solution. They create the problem, or hysterically amplify a small problem, wait for the population's reaction, the panic, the plea for security, and then present the predetermined solution, which almost always involves transferring more power to the state or global institutions, and crucially, restricting more individual freedoms. You surrender your sovereignty in exchange for the empty promise that they will solve the crisis. And here's the key point that most people fail to see: manufactured crises and scarcity narratives serve as smokescreens. The primary objective of these terror operations is not what's being reported, but what's happening behind the scenes. While your attention is fixed on the virus, the war, or the price of gasoline, the system is executing the most massive wealth transfer in history, consolidating assets from the middle and lower classes in the hands of mega corporations and the financial elite. They create chaos to justify draconian measures that would be impossible to implement in times of peace and prosperity, such as the creation of programmable central bank digital currencies, CBDCs, the purposeful destruction of small and medium-sized businesses in favor of retail giants, or the expansion of digital surveillance. The beast is facing a loss of global hegemony. The financial model petrodollars and the unilateral dominance of certain countries is crumbling. Instead of accepting a peaceful transition to a more just and decentralized multipolar system, which is what the world truly needs, they choose the path of coercion and desperation. They need the public to be so paralyzed by fear that it accepts anything that delays the inevitable collapse of their own power. Fear is the silent consent to dystopia. Revealing this tactic is what takes away the beast's power. Fear only has power if you don't recognize it as a tool of external manipulation. When you understand that collective anxiety is a product of design and not a spontaneous phenomenon, you regain your emotional autonomy. Your awakened mind realizes that the real risk is not what's in the headlines, but the passive surrender of freedom under the pretext of security. The solution to the cortisol bomb they're throwing at us is frequency calibration. Fear vibrates at the lowest frequency. Truth, gratitude, and love vibrate at the highest. Your most powerful resistance is simply refusing to participate in the theater of terror. This means limiting exposure to media that sells panic, seeking informational discernment, and above all, anchoring yourself in tangible reality. Your family, your community, your meaningful work, your spiritual connection. The beast cannot control your garden, your meditation, or your conversation with a neighbor in search of truth. It only controls the mental space you give it. The system is desperate because the decentralization of consciousness is advancing faster than the centralization of power. They can build physical prisons, but they cannot imprison an idea whose time has come. They are investing heavily in monitoring technology and social engineering to keep us separated and scared. They want you to fear the own air that breathes, the next step that gives, and the next human being, that which it encounters. That is the essence of state psychological terrorism, transforming the basic human experience of interaction and exploration into an unacceptable risk. However, the beast is not monolithic. It is a controlling body made up of individuals, and that is where its second fatal flaw lies. Fear, besides paralyzing us, also destroys internal cohesion. The elites, in their terror of losing control, are competing with each other, committing increasingly ridiculous and visible errors, as we have already seen in the Matrix glitch. And this miscalculation leads directly to our next point: the silent revolution that the beast failed to foresee. While they focused on terrorizing us with external threats, the inner awakening of millions of people was occurring discreetly and powerfully. This force is not in the barricades, it is in the shift in frequency and the abandonment of the official narrative. The system can control the body, but it cannot control the human spirit that rediscovers its own sovereignty. Now I want to know from you, what was the exact moment when you realized that a crisis amplified by the media was actually a smokescreen for something much bigger and more nefarious? Were you able to identify the power shift that was occurring while your attention was being diverted? Share your insight in the comments using the hashtag #ShaFreeFrequency. Next, we will explore the awakening of consciousness, the only enemy the beast has never been able to silence. The beast, in its cold and purely materialistic arrogance, made the most elementary miscalculation. It focused on controlling everything external to humanity, the economy, politics, the media, and even the climate, but completely neglected the human and spiritual factor. What the beast did not foresee, and which became its most lethal, silent enemy, is the awakening of consciousness. While the elites orchestrated their last fear-mongering card, injecting panic into the veins of society to divert attention from their transfer of wealth and their loss of hegemony, something profound and irreversible was happening in millions of hearts and minds around the globe. People, exhausted from being treated like cattle, drained by the endless cycle of debt and despair, simply said, "Enough." It wasn't a cry in the streets, although there were cries. It was a deafening silence of inner recognition. It was the critical mass of individuals who, simultaneously, stopped consenting. It is crucial to understand that this is not a revolution in the traditional sense. It is not an armed revolution with tanks and rifles, for the beast always wins the war of brute force. This is a revolution of frequency and perception, and it is invincible because it takes place in the inner realm, a domain where the control system has no jurisdiction. The beast's control depends on your tacit acceptance of its rules of the game. It needs you to believe in the value of its money, in the unquestionable authority of its politicians, and in the absolute veracity of its media spokespeople. This entire structure is based on fiduciary faith, trust placed in something without intrinsic value, and belief in authority. When you awaken, you are no longer challenging the system. You are withdrawing your energetic endorsement from it. What happens is a quantum phenomenon in social reality. You stop believing the lie, and the power structure that depended on your belief instantly crumbles in your particular universe. The beast becomes a faint mirage, an empty roar that you no longer have to fear. You understand that the chains were not around you, but within your mind, and the key to releasing them was always in your hands. Awakening is not an ideology. It is a change of state. It is the migration from the reactive mind, the one dominated by fear, guilt, and shame, to the creative mind, anchored in truth, purpose, and sovereignty. People are reconnecting with ancestral wisdom and the suppressed knowledge we discussed, validating their intuitions instead of delegating their truth to an external authority. What was once scattered and isolated is now becoming a field of vibrational coherence. This movement of consciousness manifests itself in various spheres, all lethal to the beast. On a personal level, it is the pursuit of self-sufficiency in health, refusing to delegate healing to a system that profits from illness. It is the rejection of rampant consumerism in favor of a minimalist and intentional life. It is the abandonment of jobs that drain the soul in exchange for the pursuit of a life purpose aligned with inner truth. At the social level, awakening generates an organic connection outside of controlled channels. People are uniting in intentional communities, exchanging services and information, and creating parallel support structures that bypass the centralized system. The beast wanted us isolated in our homes, interacting only through monitored platforms. But the energy of awakened consciousness is magnetic. It attracts the similar. The result is the flourishing of alternative information networks, homeschooling, and local food initiatives that sever the ties of dependence on large corporations. What the architects of the beast failed to understand is the fractal nature of reality. They thought that by controlling the top of the pyramid, they would control everything, but awakened consciousness operates from the bottom up at the individual level. It's a viral spread of sanity. A father awakens and educates his children differently. A neighbor awakens and organizes a seed exchange group. A programmer awakens and begins to build decentralization technology. Every small act of non-consent is a pixel that goes blank on the Matrix's projection screen. The beast's strength is its illusion of omnipresence. When millions of people simply ignore it, it loses its magical power. This is the most exciting turning point in our journey. We don't need to fight against the beast, which only feeds it with our energy of conflict. We simply need to build alongside it, in the sense of focusing all our energy on creating a new paradigm. The energy we previously spent on fear, anger, and servitude is now being redirected toward building the new Earth. The proof that this is working lies in the growing neurosis of the elite. They watch horrified as their most powerful tools, censorship, fear, and money, are losing their effectiveness over increasingly larger segments of the population. They may try to call us lunatics, but the tranquility and joy of those who live in the frequency of truth are a more powerful testament than any newspaper headline. True liberation is the smile of the person who has realized that they are an eternal being, and that all the beast's paraphernalia of control is irrelevant to their existence. However, this silent revolution needs a practical complement to be fully effective: economic sovereignty. The beast lives off their money, and to seal the victory of the awakening, we need to understand how the financial system is the last chain that needs to be broken. The energy of consciousness is unbeatable, but we need material tools to build the new world. How can we disable the beast's financial heart and begin to use our own power to create value? That is what we will dedicate ourselves to next. Your awakening of consciousness is undoubtedly the silent enemy that the beast fears most, for it restores your inner sovereignty. But for this frequency revolution to materialize in freedom in the physical world, we need to deactivate the last and strongest chain that still binds us: the economic chain. We have arrived at economic revelation, the practical point where suppressed knowledge meets transformative action. The beast lives off their money, and to seal its downfall, we need to understand the fraudulent nature of this system in order to abandon it. The beating heart of the beast is the centralized financial system. It is not a system of value exchange. It is a mechanism for extracting wealth operated by an oligarchy of central banks and financial institutions that act as parasites. The great fraud lies in our naive acceptance that paper money, or the digits on a computer screen, represent something real. But as we have discussed, ever since money ceased to be backed by something tangible and began to be created out of nothing, from nothing by decree, it became a tool of absolute control. The beast, through its central banks, has the power to print value out of thin air. This is not a flaw in the system, it is its primary function. By flooding the economy with newly created fiat currency, they dilute the value of every hour of work you dedicated to earning the money that is already in your pocket. This process, known as inflation, is not an accidental market phenomenon. It is the invisible tax, the most efficient and silent form of theft ever invented. The beast doesn't need to come to you to take your money. It simply diminishes its purchasing power each day, forcing you to work harder and faster, the hamster on the wheel, just to maintain your standard of living. The liberating truth is that real money isn't colored paper or bank digits. Real money is your energy and production. It's the time you spend creating, building, planting, or serving the community. The beast's fiduciary system is a paper bridge that carries your energy, your time, to their pocket, your debt. They aren't interested in your happiness or your progress, but only in ensuring you remain forever on the side of scarcity and debt, selling your future to pay for your present. The beast has an existential fear of decentralization. For centuries, control has been maintained through the centralization of everything: government, media, armies, and crucially, money. Centralization allows for the editing of history, the coordination of censorship, and large-scale financial manipulation. This is why the emergence of technologies that enable peer-to-peer value transfer without the need for a central intermediary, such as a bank or a government, represents the fatal blow to the heart of this parasitic entity. The transition to a new, decentralized and transparent model is already underway. It's not about endorsing a specific financial asset, but about recognizing the principle of monetary sovereignty. When you use forms of value that are immutable, scarce by design, and verifiable by anyone in the world, you are withdrawing your fiduciary faith from the beast's system. You are literally cutting the financial umbilical cord that connects you to the system of extraction. Money, in this new model, becomes once again a fair store of value and not a weapon of confiscation. It is vital at this point that you understand the threat the centralized system is facing, for it is this threat that justifies the hysterical haste with which they are trying to implement central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. CBDC is not a technological innovation, it is a disguised digital financial prison. If current fiat money is already a tool of control, CBDC is the dystopian and programmable version. With CBDC, the beast would have total control over as where and when you can spend your own money. They could impose expiration dates on your money, penalize you for buying products deemed antisocial or unsustainable, and even freeze your assets instantly if you become a dissenter from the narrative. The CBDC is the latest effort to centralize control over your money, because the beast knows that decentralized money destroys its power base. Therefore, your economic liberation strategy must be active and intentional. It involves the progressive disconnection from the fiduciary system. This means sovereign financial education. Learn how to protect your value in assets beyond the reach of money printing, whether they are precious metals, decentralized digital assets, or highly useful tangible goods. Resource localization. Give preference to local currencies and exchanges, barter systems, and the creation of community-based circular economies that do not depend on logistics or currency controlled by the beast. Debt reduction. Prioritize eliminating perpetual debt, as each interest payment is a donation of your vital energy to the control system. Valuing production. Understanding that your greatest wealth is not in what he has, but in what do you create. Knowledge, skills, and the ability to produce essential goods and services are collapse-proof assets. Economic revelation transforms your anxiety into empowerment. You cease to be a passive victim of inflation and become a sovereign financial architect. The beast's money only has power over those who are afraid to leave it. Your escape from the fiduciary matrix is a vote of no confidence that reverberates throughout the entire power structure. The fall of the great beast will not be decreed by a single political event, but rather by a silent and mass exodus of its infrastructure. The awakening of consciousness is the engine. Economic sovereignty is the map. The beast relies on a hierarchy of power and obedience, and surprisingly, this entire hierarchy is being exposed by its own members, who, in the panic of collapse, are breaking ranks. The next logical step is to look at the beast itself and see the internal chaos. The figures who were once untouchable, the masters who dictated our reality, are beginning to have their secrets exposed to the world. Historical impunity is coming to an end, and what lies behind this exposure is yet another sign that the system is in its final phase of self-destruction. Before we reveal what's happening in the shadows of the elite, I want you to tell me, if you could remove a single economic chain from your life today, which would it be? Consumer debt, wage dependency, or belief in fiat money? Leave your comment and use the hashtag GUK monetary sovereignty to declare your financial independence. Next, we'll talk about the Untouchables exhibition. Your declaration of monetary sovereignty is a brick removed from the beast's castle. You have awakened, understood the historical fraud, and are breaking the financial chains. Now, prepare for the climax of this journey. The entire architecture of control, the entire lie of debt and fear, fundamentally depended on one thing: the unquestionable impunity of its highest-ranking operators. The figures who presented themselves to the world as philanthropists, benevolent global leaders, or financial geniuses were, in fact, the priests of the beast, moving in the shadows, certain that their actions would never be scrutinized by the light of day. But this historical impunity is coming to an end. What we are witnessing at this moment is the exposure of the untouchables, a slow but fatal process of stripping bare the global elite. For the first time in centuries, the actions of the individuals who govern behind the scenes of our world are being recorded, analyzed, and disclosed outside of controlled channels. And what is coming to light is more shocking than any fiction, proving that power, when exercised in darkness, invariably leads to moral degeneration and practices that violate all human principles. The beast always thrived in secrecy. Its operations were conducted in the dark basements of closed organizations, on private islands, and in closed-door meetings where the rules of ethics and law did not apply. They could orchestrate wars, economic crises, and major social engineering schemes without fear of repercussions because they controlled the courts, the police, and crucially, the gatekeepers of the narrative, the mainstream media. What has changed? The awakening of consciousness has armed the individual with the power of decentralized information. The Internet is not just an entertainment tool. It has become the largest forensic archive in history. Every leak of documents, every denunciation of a whistleblower courageously, each independent data analysis creates a digital footprint that the beast cannot erase. The untouchables relied on silence and fear. But the current of truth is running strong, and it is dissolving their cloak of invisibility. We are seeing figures who have been awarded prizes and revered as visionaries being subtly, and sometimes not so subtly, linked to networks of control that range from market manipulation to conduct bordering on barbarity. We cannot mention specific names at this time to avoid direct censorship, but you know who we are talking about. These are the individuals whose link scandals, previously dismissed as theories, are now being revealed in official documents, flight records, and testimonies reported by the press. Mainstream desperately tries to suppress or discredit. Shame and truth are the acids corroding the beast's armor. The elite's power resides not only in wealth, but in their public image of benevolence and moral superiority. When that image is destroyed, when the public understands that the supposed saviors are, in fact, the architects of misery, the structure of authority crumbles. Exposure is not just about legal punishment, it's about the irreparable loss of legitimacy. The beast, in its desperation, tried to hide the evil it practiced under the guise of corporate philanthropy, using large foundations to influence global policies and divert attention from its behind-the-scenes operations. But the light of independent investigation showed that often philanthropy was merely a vehicle for image laundering and for advancing eugenic and population control agendas under the pretext of saving the world. What is crucial to note is the domino effect of this exposure. Panic within the beast's hierarchy is leading to internal rifts. Members of the elite themselves, seeing the ship sinking and fearing public exposure, are beginning to break ranks, leaking information and testifying against their former allies. The beast's code of silence and loyalty is being broken by the survival instinct of its less powerful participants. This leads us to a crucial understanding of the nature of the fall. The beast will not be overthrown by an external army, but rather by its own internal corruption brought to light. Forced transparency acts like a virus that attacks the immune system of lies. Truth is not merely a philosophical concept, it is a destructive force against oppression. Therefore, your role at this moment is not to judge, which consumes our energy, but rather to observe with clinical clarity. Follow the news reports from the media. Mainstream it is not covering. Observe who is being suddenly silenced or who is abandoning the public scene with flimsy excuses. Every escape, every resignation, every scandal that the media tries to minimize. This is proof that the pressure of truth is becoming unsustainable. We are at the moment of public judgment. The beast tried to place itself above humanity, but now it is forced to face the mirror of its own monstrosity. This exposure is not the end, but the vibrant prelude to a world where responsibility is no longer an option, but a guarantee. With the shadows dissolving, the path ahead becomes clear. If the beast is collapsing and its leaders are being exposed, what is emerging to fill this power vacuum? What will we do with our reclaimed sovereignty? This is a time of transition, and we need to focus on proactive creation. We need to envision and build the new paradigm of sovereignty and self-sufficiency. The Untouchables exposure confirms what your awakening of consciousness already told you. The beast is in total collapse, corroded by its own corruption, brought to light. We withdrew our energetic endorsement, undermined its financial base, and unmasked its leaders. Now is the time to abandon diagnosis and embrace healing. If we spent so much time uncovering what we don't want, we need, urgently and clearly, to focus on what we are building. We have arrived at the new paradigm, sovereignty and self-sufficiency. What will the world be like without the oppressive shadow of the beast? Freedom is not a political abstraction debated in controlled courts or parliaments. It becomes a state of being, a practical reality forged in daily actions. The future we are co-creating is defined by sovereignty in all its spheres: mental, physical, food, and economic sovereignty. The true revolution is the ability to plant, create, heal, and educate without the parasitic interference of state or corporate bureaucrats. Paint the picture with me. The vision of self-sufficient communities emerges as the model of social organization for the future. Forget the sprawling cities, dependent on fragile global supply chains and vulnerable to control. The new exodus is not to metropolises, but to oases of local freedom. We are talking about networks of neighbors who share knowledge, tools, and resources, where food security is not delegated to 4 gigantic corporations, but is guaranteed by community gardens and regenerative agriculture systems. Food becomes a source of health again, not a vector of toxins and control. The technology that was once the beast's tool for surveillance and control is being reclaimed and redirected to serve life. Think of free energy returning to the public domain, decentralized water harvesting systems, and encrypted communication structures that guarantee digital privacy and uncensored information exchange. Innovation will no longer be directed towards creating products of planned obsolescence or weapons of war, but towards developing open-source solutions that empower the individual and the small community. Artificial intelligence, once seen as the beast's totalitarian eye, is being reoriented to be an assistant that optimizes resources and health, not a tool for behavioral control. The restoration of genuine human connection is the lubricant of this new paradigm. The social isolation imposed by the beast, whether through fear, ideological division, or overwork, is being actively reversed. The new value lies in social capital. People are prioritizing time spent in meaningful interaction and mutual learning over passive consumption and validation on social networks. The neighborhood is once again becoming a point of organic interaction and mutual support, where the exchange of skills is more valuable than the exchange of fiat money. In the field of health, the paradigm shifts from symptomatic and expensive treatment, which benefits the pharmaceutical industry, to sovereign medicine. Vibrational healing, natural knowledge, and self-healing based on nutrition and awareness become the standard. Information on how to maintain the body in optimal health is democratized, taking power away from the gatekeepers who profit from chronic illness. Freedom of medical choice becomes an inalienable human right, and each individual's body once again becomes a sovereign territory. In education, the revolution is even more profound. The beast's factory model, designed to create obedient workers, is replaced by sovereignty-based education. Autonomous schools, homeschooling, and self-directed learning flourish. The focus is no longer on memorization and diplomas, but on developing innate potential, critical thinking, and practical wisdom. Children are taught to be creators, not just consumers, to understand the nature of real money, true history, and natural laws. Legal sovereignty accompanies this transition. As the beast's legal system becomes increasingly corrupt and serves corporate interests, common law systems based on zero-harm principles and individual responsibility are emerging. Communities are developing internal mechanisms for conflict mediation and local governance that operate with transparency and ethics, bypassing costly and ineffective state bureaucracy. This new paradigm is not a distant utopia. It is being built now, silently, by millions of people who have already withdrawn from the matrix of control. Every seed planted, every decentralized currency used, every child educated outside the system, every neighbor helped. These are bricks in the foundation of the free world. The fall of the beast is the necessary clearing of the ground. Sovereignty and self-reliance are the architectural blueprint of our new age. The success of this new model depends entirely on our persistence in creating instead of fighting. The beast wants us to remain trapped in the duality of conflict. Our victory is the ascension to the frequency of creation, where fear and scarcity have no place. It is the materialization of the truth that liberates. But there is one last, crucial step. This entire process requires a final shift in mindset. We need to understand that the time for waiting for an external savior is over. The ultimatum is personal. You are the protagonist, and the action must begin now. You have already mapped out the fraud, unraveled the architecture of the beast's oppression, seen its leaders fall in the untouchables' exposure, and visualized the beauty and practicality of the new paradigm of sovereignty and self-sufficiency. We have reached the moment of maximum gravity and, paradoxically, maximum liberation. The ultimatum: choose your side. This is not the end of the video, but the beginning of your new life. If you've made it this far, it's because you're no longer just an audience member. You're a protagonist, forced by your own conscience to make a decision. The fall of the beast is mathematically and energetically inevitable. The system is unsustainable, self-destructive, and bankrupt on every level, morally, financially, and historically. The question is not, with he will fall, but where you will be there when he does. Individual destiny now depends entirely on where each one decides to place their energy of attention and creation. The beast, in its death throes, will make its last and most dramatic attempt to drag you back into fear and dependence. They will try to flood the world with narratives of panic, forcing increasingly bizarre and authoritarian crises as a last effort to make you beg for a benevolent controller. But you have the knowledge, and knowledge is the spiritual shield against terror. You know that chaos is not strength, but the collapse of lies. Your urgency lies in understanding that there is no more time for passive neutrality or for sitting on the fence. The ultimatum is simple, but it demands courage. Do you abandon the old system, or do you go down with it? Abandoning the old system is not an act of vandalism or fruitless rebellion. It is an act of strategic energy withdrawal. It is the silent and powerful action of the sovereign individual who decides to no longer be the parasite's battery. This manifests itself in concrete steps that you can and should begin today. Financial withdrawal. If you're still trapped, begin the fiduciary exodus. Convert your labor power, money, into real assets, outside the control of centralized printing, whether they are land, tools, precious metals, or decentralized digital assets. Turn off the tap that drains your wealth into the system. Information sovereignty. Cancel your emotional subscription to controlled media. Actively seek independent and diverse sources. Exercise discernment as your most sacred filter. Don't let fear enter your eyes and ears. Protect your vibrational frequency. Community building. Stop waiting for the solution to come from above. Look around you. Connect with your neighbors. with people who share your desire for autonomy and ethics. Start creating the parallel systems you envisioned: gardens, learning groups, service exchange networks. The strength of the new paradigm lies in its fractal and organic structure, not in its hierarchy. Remember, the time for worrying about what others will do or think is over. Time is your most scarce resource and should be invested only in creation. Every minute spent in reactive outrage is a minute that feeds the beast. Every minute spent building your garden, learning a new self-sufficiency skill, or teaching the truth to your children is a minute that permanently diverts energy from the control system. Freedom is not a gift. It is a constant conquest. It demands your total responsibility. There is no longer the figure of the government or corporation that will take care of you. That is the illusion of slavery. Your security, your prosperity, and your health are now your sovereign responsibility. Fear tries to convince you that you are incapable, but your awakening of consciousness has proven otherwise. You are a creative being, endowed with intuition and power that the beast has never been able to replicate or destroy. This video ends with an irreversible call to action. Abandon the old system. Stop feeding the beast with your attention and start building the new world today. The truth has already been told. The action is up to you. The age of parasites is dying out, and the dawn of sovereignty demands that sovereigns rise up and build their own sun. If you are ready to accept this ultimatum, if you are ready to abandon fear and dedicate yourself to creating the new paradigm with all your strength, I want you to make this commitment publicly. Leave your comment below and use the most powerful phrase that summarizes your decision from now on. I am sovereign and I am building the new world. #Freedom Ultimatum. Share this video with everyone you love and who deserves the chance to choose their side before it's too late. The time to choose is now.